James Callahan woke up that November morning the same way he'd woken up for the past 8 years. Alone. The cabin was cold, frost coating the windows in delicate patterns. He pulled on his heavy flannel shirt and wool socks, then made his way to the kitchen to start the coffee. This was his routine, his life, and he'd convinced himself he liked it this way. At 42, James had made peace with solitude. After his marriage fell apart, he'd sold everything and bought this place up in the mountains. 20 acres of pine trees, a sturdy cabin he'd renovated himself, and the nearest neighbor 3 miles down a dirt road. It was quiet. It was simple. It was safe. He poured his coffee and walked to the front window, looking out at the mountain peaks in the distance. The sun was just starting to rise, painting everything in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful, like always. He took a sip of his coffee and froze. There was someone on his porch. James set down his mug and grabbed his jacket, his mind racing. Nobody just showed up at his cabin. You couldn't stumble onto his property by accident. You had to know it was here. He opened the door carefully, and that's when he saw her clearly. A young woman sat huddled against the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest, shivering despite the coat she wore. The coat was too thin for November in the mountains. She had dark hair pulled back in a messy braid, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were red from crying. "Please," she said, her accent thick and unfamiliar. "Please, I need help." James stood there for a moment, completely thrown off balance. In 8 years, nothing had disrupted his careful routine. Now there was a terrified woman on his porch at dawn, and he had no idea what to do. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. She shook her head quickly. "No, not hurt. But I cannot go back. Please, I have nowhere to go." "Back where?" James asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. There was only one other house within miles. "Carl," she whispered, and James felt his jaw tighten. Carl Henderson was his neighbor, though calling him that was generous. They'd maybe spoken 10 times in 8 years. Carl was mean, bitter, and kept to himself in that rundown trailer of his. James had learned early on to just stay clear of him. "You know Carl?" James asked. The woman nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am Elena. I came from Romania 2 weeks ago. Carl, he said he wanted wife. I thought—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "I thought it would be good life. But it is not. He is cruel. His house, it is terrible. He drinks and yells. Yesterday he grabbed my arm very hard when I burned dinner. I waited until he went to town today, and I ran. I walked until I found your house." James sat back on his heels, processing this. A mail-order bride. He'd heard about such things, but never thought much about them. Never imagined one would end up on his porch, desperate and scared. "Come inside," he said finally. "You're freezing." Elena hesitated, and James understood why. She didn't know him. For all she knew, he could be worse than Carl. But the cold won out, and she slowly got to her feet, clutching a small suitcase he hadn't noticed before. Inside, James pointed to the couch. "Sit there. I'll get you something warm." He made her tea and found one of his thick wool sweaters. It swallowed her small frame, but she pulled it around herself gratefully. While she warmed up, James made eggs and toast. She ate like she hadn't had a decent meal in days, which made him angry in a way that surprised him. "Tell me what happened," he said, sitting across from her at his kitchen table. Elena's story came out in bits and pieces. She'd been a teacher in Romania, living with her parents. Her father had gotten sick, and they couldn't afford his medicine. Elena had seen an ad online, a website where American men looked for foreign wives. Carl had seemed kind in his emails. He'd sent photos of a nice ranch, talked about wanting a partner, someone to build a life with. "I thought I could help my family," Elena said quietly. "Send money for Papa's treatment. And maybe I could be happy too. Have family of my own someday." But Carl, he lied about everything. His house is falling apart. He has no ranch, just some broken fence and old equipment. And he does not want partner. He wants servant. Someone who cannot leave. James listened, his anger growing. He'd never liked Carl, but this was different. This was deliberately hurting someone who'd trusted you. Someone who'd given up everything and traveled across the world. "You can't stay here long term," James said carefully. "But you can stay until we figure something out. There's a women's shelter in Boulder. I can call them." Elena nodded, relief flooding her face. "Thank you. I will not be trouble. I promise." "What about your papers?" James asked. "Your visa?" "I have fiancé visa," Elena said. But if Carl reports me, if I do not marry him, she trailed off, fear clear in her eyes. James rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. This was complicated, way more complicated than his simple mountain life was supposed to be. Let's take it one step at a time, he said. First you rest. You're safe here. Then we'll make some calls and figure out your options. Elena looked at him with such gratitude that it made James uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being looked at like that, like he was some kind of hero. He was just doing what anyone decent would do. He showed her to his guest room, a small space he usually used for storage. It wasn't much, but the bed was clean and the window looked out at the mountains. You sleep, James said. I'll be in the workshop if you need anything. It's the building out back. Elena nodded and closed the door. James stood in the hallway for a moment, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. He spent the morning in his workshop, trying to focus on the chair he was building. Woodworking usually cleared his mind, but today his thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin, to Elena, to what Carl might do when he realized she was gone. Around noon, James heard the unmistakable sound of Carl's truck rumbling up the mountain road. He set down his tools and walked outside, positioning himself in the driveway. Sure enough, Carl's beat-up pickup came into view, kicking up dust and rocks. Carl got out, and James could smell the alcohol from 10 feet away. She here? Carl demanded, not even bothering with a greeting. Who? James asked calmly, though his fists clenched at his sides. Don't play dumb with me, Callahan. That Romanian girl, Elena. She ran off, and this is the only place she could have gone. If there was someone here who didn't want to see you, James said slowly, I'd respect that. Time for you to leave, Carl. Carl's face turned red. She's mine. I paid for her to come here. She owes me. People aren't property, James said, his voice hard. Get off my land. For a moment, James thought Carl might actually take a swing at him. But James was bigger and a lot more sober, and Carl seemed to realize it. Instead, he jabbed a finger at James. This ain't over, Carl snarled. I'll get the law involved. She's here illegally without me. I'll have her deported. He stormed back to his truck and tore off down the road. James watched until the dust settled, then walked back to the cabin. Elena was standing in the living room, her face pale. He will make trouble, she said softly. Let him try, James replied, surprised by the protectiveness he felt. You're not going back there. As the sun set that evening, James made dinner while Elena sat at the kitchen table, quiet and clearly exhausted. They ate in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft white flakes drifting past the windows. James looked at this stranger in his home, this woman who'd appeared out of nowhere and turned his simple life upside down, and felt something shift inside him, something he thought had died years ago when his marriage ended. He pushed the feeling down. She needed help, nothing more. He'd make his calls tomorrow, find her a safe place to go, and his life would go back to normal. But as he watched Elena curl up on his couch with a blanket, looking small and lost and brave all at once, James had a feeling that normal was already long gone. The next morning, James woke up and for a split second forgot everything that had happened. Then he heard movement in the kitchen and remembered. Elena, the mail-order bride, Carl's threats. He groaned and dragged himself out of bed. When he walked into the kitchen, he stopped short. The entire room was spotless, cleaner than it had been in months, maybe years. The dishes he'd left in the sink were washed and put away. The counters shined, and Elena stood at the stove cooking something that smelled incredible. Good morning, she said, looking nervous. I hope you do not mind. I could not sleep, so I cleaned, and I am making breakfast. Traditional Romanian dish called mămăligă. It is like, how you say, polenta. James scratched his head, still half asleep. You didn't have to do that. Please, Elena said quickly. Let me help. You are being so kind. I must do something. Over breakfast, which was surprisingly delicious, James made phone calls. The women's shelter in Boulder was full. So was the one in Denver. The woman on the phone suggested trying again in a week or two. What about your visa situation? James asked Elena after he hung up. We need to talk to a lawyer. Elena looked down at her plate. I have no money for lawyer. Let me worry about that, James said. After some searching online, he found an immigration attorney in Denver who specialized in cases like Elena's. When James explained the situation, The lawyer agreed to take her case for free. She should qualify for a U visa, the lawyer explained. It's for victims of certain crimes, including domestic violence. But the process takes time. Months, maybe longer. After the call, Elena looked both hopeful and terrified. What do I do until then? James didn't have a good answer. He couldn't just kick her out with nowhere to go and Carl lurking around. You stay here, he said finally, until we figure this out. But people will talk, Elena said. In small town, people always talk. Let them, James replied, though he knew she was right. The mountain community was small and everyone knew everyone's business. The first week was awkward. James was used to his space, his silence, his routines. Elena tried to stay out of his way, but she was there, always there. In the kitchen when he made coffee. In the living room when he read in the evening. It threw him off balance, but slowly things started to change. Elena was determined to earn her keep. She cleaned everything, cooked meals that made his simple cabin smell like a real home. She learned how he liked his coffee and started having it ready when he came in from the workshop. She mended his clothes without being asked, fixed the curtain that had been falling down for months. You really don't have to do all this, James said one evening, watching her scrub his kitchen floor. Elena sat back on her heels. In my country, we have saying, when someone gives you shelter, you honor their home. You have given me more than shelter. You have given me safety. This is small thing I can do. James felt something uncomfortable in his chest. Gratitude, maybe, or guilt that he'd lived so long without anyone showing him this kind of care. By the second week, Carl showed up again. This time he had papers in his hand. Lawsuit, Carl announced, shoving the documents at James. She owes me $10,000, breach of contract, and I'm reporting her to immigration. James looked at the papers, then at Carl's smug face. You go ahead and do that. My lawyer's already on it. That wiped the smile off Carl's face. You got her a lawyer? That's right. Turns out what you did to her, how you treated her, that's abuse. And she's got rights whether you like it or not. Carl's face turned purple. He started to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he just pointed at James. You're making a big mistake, Callahan. Getting involved in this. After Carl left, Elena came out from where she'd been hiding in the bedroom. I am bringing you so much trouble, she said, tears in her eyes. Maybe I should go back to Romania. Is that what you want? James asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment. I do not know what I want anymore. I came here for wrong reasons. To save my father, yes, but also to escape. I thought America would solve all my problems. But problems follow you everywhere. That's true enough, James agreed. But you've got options here. You don't have to marry some jerk to stay. You can figure out your own path. Something in Elena's expression softened when he said that. But she just nodded and went back to the kitchen. The routine they fell into surprised James. He'd wake up to coffee and breakfast. Elena would clean and do laundry while he worked in his workshop. In the afternoons, when the weather was decent, James started teaching her things about mountain life. How to split wood properly, how to recognize animal tracks in the snow, where the best fishing spots were. Elena was a fast learner and braver than he'd expected. The first time he handed her an axe, she'd looked terrified. But she set her jaw and swung until she got the technique right. When she finally split a log cleanly, she'd laughed with such pure joy that James found himself smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. In Romania, I was teacher, Elena said one afternoon while they were stacking firewood. I taught English to children. I loved it so much. What made you leave? James asked. My father's medicine cost more than I make in a whole year, Elena said quietly. And my mother, she is too old to work anymore. I felt so helpless watching them struggle. When I saw the website, the men looking for wives, I thought maybe this is answer. Marry someone kind, help my family, start new life. But I was foolish. You weren't foolish, James said. You were desperate. There's a difference. And you had the courage to walk away when you realized it wasn't right. A lot of people wouldn't have done that. Elena looked at him for a long moment. You are different than I expected. What did you expect? I do not know. Another Carl, maybe. But you are gentle, kind. You live alone, but you are not angry at the world. James thought about that. I was angry for a long time, he admitted. After my wife left. After I found out she'd been cheating with my business partner. I came up here to hide, basically. Convinced myself I was better off alone. And now? Elena asked. James didn't answer right away. He loaded another piece of wood onto the pile, thinking about how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. How the cabin felt different with someone else in it. How he'd started looking forward to meals instead of just eating to survive. How he caught himself thinking about Elena at odd moments, wondering if she'd like the sunset or what she thought about the deer he'd seen that morning. "Now I'm not so sure," he said finally. December arrived with a vengeance. The temperature dropped below freezing and stayed there. Snow fell almost daily, transforming the mountain into a winter wonderland. James made sure they had plenty of firewood and supplies. Getting snowed in was a real possibility, and he wanted to be prepared. Elena seemed fascinated by the snow. She'd stand at the window for long stretches, watching it fall. "We have snow in Romania," she explained, "but not like this. Not so wild and beautiful." One evening, after a particularly good dinner of soup and fresh bread Elena had baked, they sat by the fire. James was reading and Elena was working on some embroidery she'd started. "James," she said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you help me?" "You did not know me. I could have been anyone. But you let me stay, you protect me, you got me lawyer." "Why?" James set down his book. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel trapped. To have your life fall apart and not know how to put it back together. Or maybe just because it was the right thing to do." "Not everyone does the right thing," Elena said softly. "No," James agreed. "They don't." Elena went back to her embroidery, but James caught her smiling to herself. Something about that smile did strange things to his heart. The immigration lawyer called with an update. Elena's case was moving forward, but she needed to document everything about her situation with Carl. Write down dates, times, what he'd said and done. It was painful for Elena to relive those 2 weeks, but she did it. Meanwhile, Carl was getting worse. He'd spread rumors in town about James harboring an illegal immigrant. He'd driven by the cabin multiple times, always slowing down to glare at the house. James's friend, Sheriff Tom Davidson, stopped by to check on things. "Carl's making a lot of noise," Tom said, accepting a cup of coffee. "But between you and me, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. What he did, bringing that girl over here and treating her like that, it's not right." "You're doing the right thing, James." After Tom left, Elena looked worried. "Everyone knows now. The whole town must be talking." "Probably," James admitted. "Small towns are like that. But Tom's on our side and he's the law around here. We'll be okay." That night, the first real blizzard of the season hit. Wind howled around the cabin and snow fell so thick you couldn't see 5 feet past the windows. James checked all the supplies, made sure they had enough wood, enough food, enough everything. "Have you been through a mountain blizzard before?" he asked Elena. She shook her head, eyes wide as she looked at the white wall outside the window. "We could be stuck here for a few days," James said. "Maybe longer. No power if the lines go down. Just us and the fire." Elena nodded, but he could see she was scared. That night, as the storm raged outside and the cabin creaked against the wind, James found himself awake in his room, listening. Making sure Elena was okay. Making sure she wasn't frightened. Around midnight, he heard her door open. Footsteps in the hallway. He got up and found her standing in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the fire. "Cannot sleep," she said. "The wind, it is so loud." James sat down on the couch. "First blizzard's always scary. But we're safe. This cabin survived worse." Elena sat down too, keeping a careful distance. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire dance. "James," Elena said finally, "thank you for everything. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not opened your door." "You would have figured something out," James said. "You're stronger than you think." Elena turned to look at him, the firelight casting shadows across her face. Something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them was ready to name. James felt it pull at him, strong and unexpected and terrifying. He stood up abruptly. "I should check the generator before I turn in." "You okay here?" Elena nodded, looking confused and maybe a little hurt. James fled to the safety of his room, his heart pounding. He was in trouble. Real trouble. Because somewhere between opening his door that first morning and tonight, between teaching her to split wood and sharing quiet dinners, he'd started to care about Elena. More than he should. More than was safe. She was vulnerable, dealing with trauma, fighting for her legal right to stay in the country. The last thing she needed Was him developing feelings for her. James lay in bed listening to the storm and promised himself he'd keep his distance. He'd help her get on her feet, help her figure out her life, and then she'd move on. That was the right thing to do. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of Elena's face in the firelight, and how his cabin had started to feel less like a hiding place and more like a home. The blizzard didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. By morning, snow had drifted halfway up the front door and the wind was still screaming around the cabin. James looked out the window at the white wall of weather and knew they weren't going anywhere for days. Elena made breakfast while James checked their supplies. They had enough food, plenty of firewood, water from the well. They'd be fine, as long as the power held. Of course, 2 hours later the power went out. "Don't worry," James told Elena, who'd gone pale. "Happens all the time up here. We've got the fireplace and the wood stove. I'll get the generator running." But when James trudged through waist-deep snow to the generator shed, he found a problem. A tree branch had fallen on the shed roof during the night, and snow had gotten into the generator. It was going to take time to fix, and in this weather, working outside was dangerous. Back inside, James explained the situation. "We'll have to make do with the fireplace and candles. Stay in the living room where it's warm. I've got plenty of blankets." Elena nodded, but James could see she was trying to be brave. The cabin was already getting colder, and it would only get worse. They spent the day by the fire. James brought out every blanket and sleeping bag he owned. They moved the couch closer to the fireplace. Elena cooked soup on a camping stove James kept for emergencies. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and filling. As night fell, the temperature dropped further. James could see his breath in the kitchen. He made a decision. "We should both sleep out here tonight," he said, "by the fire. It's the only warm place in the house." Elena agreed without argument. They made a sort of camp in front of the fireplace, blankets and pillows piled up. It felt strange, but also somehow natural, like they'd done this 100 times before. They sat up talking as the fire crackled. Elena told him about growing up in Romania, about her students and how much she missed teaching. James found himself telling her things he hadn't talked about in years. About his daughter Katie, how he missed her even though they barely spoke anymore. About his ex-wife and how the betrayal had cut deeper than he'd admitted to anyone. "She did not deserve you," Elena said quietly. "Woman who would throw away good man like you, she is fool." "I wasn't easy to live with," James said. "I spent too much time working. Didn't listen when she said she was unhappy. By the time I paid attention, it was too late." "But you tried," Elena said. "That counts for something." They were quiet for a while, watching the flames dance. The wind howled outside, making the cabin creak and groan. Elena shivered despite the blankets, and without thinking, James put his arm around her shoulders. "Just for warmth," he said quickly. "Just for warmth," Elena agreed, but she leaned into him. The second day of the blizzard was harder. They were running low on candles. The cold was getting worse. James had to make several trips outside to get more firewood, coming back each time covered in snow and shaking from the wind. "You will get sick," Elena fussed, wrapping him in blankets when he came in from the 4th trip. "I'm fine," James said, though his teeth were chattering. "Mountain men don't get sick." "Mountain men are stubborn," Elena corrected, bringing him hot tea. That afternoon, James tried again to reach the generator shed. The snow had let up slightly, and he thought maybe he could clear enough to work on the generator. But the drifts were deep and the wind was still brutal. He was maybe 20 feet from the shed when his foot hit a patch of ice hidden under the snow. He went down hard, twisting his ankle. Pain shot up his leg, and for a moment he just lay there in the snow, cursing himself for being stupid. "James!" Elena's voice cut through the wind. She was at the door, wrapped in his huge coat. "James, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he called back, trying to stand. But when he put weight on his ankle, pain exploded and he nearly fell again. Elena was beside him in seconds, not caring that she was only wearing his coat over her thin clothes. She got her shoulder under his arm and helped him hobble back to the cabin. Inside, she stripped off his wet clothes with an efficiency that was both professional and caring. She wrapped him in dry blankets, propped his ankle on pillows, and checked it with gentle hands. "Is it broken?" James asked. "I do not think so," Elena said, "but badly twisted. You must stay off it. I need to get to the generator." "Generator can wait," Elena said firmly. "You cannot help anyone if you hurt yourself worse." That night was the coldest yet. The fire was their only heat source, and James's ankle throbbed with pain. They huddled together under every blanket they had, Elena wrapped against James's side. "Tell me something," Elena said softly. "Tell me about before. When you were happy," James thought back. "My daughter was maybe 5. I'd built her a treehouse in our backyard. Nothing fancy, just some wood and a ladder, but she loved it. She'd spend hours up there, pretending it was a castle or a spaceship. I'd sit at the bottom and she'd tell me stories through the window. Best summer of my life, I think. You miss her very much?" "Yeah," James admitted, "but I messed that up too. After the divorce, I was so angry. I pushed everyone away, including Katie. By the time I realized what I'd done, she didn't want anything to do with me." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Maybe not too late," she said. "Maybe she needs to know you want to fix it." "Maybe," James said, but he didn't sound convinced. "You know what I miss most?" Elena said, "Not the big things. Not my job or my friends. I miss my mother's kitchen, the way it smelled when she made Kozanac, this sweet bread. I miss Sunday mornings drinking coffee with my parents, talking about nothing important. Small things, but they were everything." "You'll see them again," James said. "Will I?" Elena turned to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes I think I made a terrible mistake. I left them to come here, and for what? 2 weeks of nightmare with Carl, and now I am burden on you." "You're not a burden," James said firmly. "Don't ever think that. But I am. I bring you trouble. I make your life complicated. You were peaceful before I came." "I wasn't peaceful," James said. "I was hiding." "There's a difference." Elena studied his face. "What were you hiding from?" "Feeling anything," James said. "If you don't let anyone in, they can't hurt you." "That was my plan anyway. Come up here, keep to myself, never risk getting hurt again." And now, James looked at her, really looked at her. At her dark eyes and the way a strand of hair had escaped from behind her ear. At the strength in her face despite everything she'd been through. At the way she was curled against him, trusting him completely. "Now I don't know," he said honestly. "You've kind of ruined my plan." Elena smiled, but it was sad. "I am sorry for that." "I'm not," James said, and meant it. They sat in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence. The kind two people share when words aren't necessary. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their little circle of firelight, everything felt still. On the 3rd day, the storm finally started to break. The wind died down and the snow led up to occasional flurries. James's ankle was better, though still tender. Elena helped him outside to assess the damage. The generator shed had been hit worse than he thought. It would take at least a day of work to fix everything. But the immediate crisis was over. They'd survived. "We did it," Elena said, looking around at the winter wonderland the blizzard had created. Everything was buried under feet of snow. The trees were heavy with it. The world was quiet and white and beautiful. "Yeah," James agreed. "We did." Elena turned to him, and something in her expression made his heart skip. "James, I need to tell you something." "What?" he asked, though part of him was afraid of what she might say. "These past few days, being trapped here with you, I have realized something. I came to America for wrong reasons. To save my family, to escape my problems, but maybe I was also running toward something, looking for something I did not know I needed." "Elena," James started, but she held up her hand. "Please, let me finish. I am scared. Scared of Carl, scared of being sent back, scared of everything. But most scared of this feeling I have when I look at you. Like maybe the best thing that ever happened to me was knocking on wrong door in the middle of the night." James felt like he couldn't breathe. "You don't know what you're saying. You've been through trauma. You're vulnerable. Your feelings aren't real, they're just gratitude mixed up with—" "Do not tell me what I feel," Elena said, and there was steel in her voice. "I know the difference between gratitude and something else. I have had time to think, James, so much time, and I think you feel it too. I see the way you look at me when you think I am not watching. I see how you care for me, how you protect me. That's just being decent," James said weakly. "No," Elena said. "It is more than that. And you know it." James wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this was a bad idea. She needed stability, not romance. She was still married to Carl legally. Her visa situation was complicated. She'd be leaving eventually anyway. He was too old for her, too damaged, too scared. But looking at her standing there in the snow, brave and beautiful and certain, all his arguments died in his throat. I can't, he said finally. You deserve better than a broken-down mountain man hiding from the world. Elena stepped closer. What if I do not want better? What if I want you? For a moment, James thought about it. About letting himself fall. About taking what she was offering. About being happy again. Then reality came crashing back. She was dealing with so much already. Adding his feelings to her burden wasn't fair. He had to be the strong one, the responsible one. We should get inside, he said, breaking eye contact. Check on the generator. He saw the hurt flash across Elena's face before she hit it. She nodded and headed back to the cabin without another word. James stood in the snow, hating himself. But it was better this way, wasn't it? Better to keep his distance, keep things simple. Better for both of them. He repeated that to himself all day while they worked on the generator. While they ate dinner in uncomfortable silence. While they went to their separate rooms that night for the first time in days. But lying alone in his bed, cold despite the blankets, James wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. In the next room, Elena lay awake too, staring at the ceiling. She'd been brave, put her heart out there, and he'd rejected her. Maybe she'd read everything wrong. Maybe he really was just being kind, and she'd made a fool of herself. Or maybe a small voice whispered. Maybe he was just as scared as she was, outside. The last of the storm finally blew itself out, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Inside the cabin, two people lay awake in separate rooms, each thinking about the other, neither brave enough to cross the hallway between them. Not yet, anyway. But something had shifted during those 3 days trapped together. Something that couldn't be unshifted. The question was what they were going to do about it. The blizzard was over, but the real storm was just beginning. The week after the blizzard was awkward. James and Elena moved around each other carefully, like two people trying not to touch a wound. They were polite. Too polite. The easy companionship they'd built was gone, replaced by stilted conversations and long silences. James threw himself into work, spending long hours in his workshop. Elena cleaned things that were already clean and cooked elaborate meals that neither of them had much appetite for. They were both miserable, but neither knew how to fix it. Then Carl made everything worse. A process server showed up at the cabin on a Friday morning. He handed James an official-looking envelope and left. Inside were legal documents. Carl was suing Elena for $10,000, claiming breach of contract. He'd attached emails where he'd paid for her plane ticket and visa paperwork, arguing she owed him for the investment he'd made. This is insane, James said, reading through the papers. He can't do this. Elena's face had gone white. But he is doing it. And maybe he is right. Maybe I do owe him money. I did agree to marry him. Under false pretenses, James said firmly. He lied about everything. You don't owe him anything. But the lawsuit was just the beginning. 2 days later, Carl followed through on his threat to report Elena to immigration. She got a letter saying her visa status was under review and she needed to appear for a hearing. They will send me back, Elena said, staring at the letter. Her hands were shaking. I cannot fight Carl and immigration both. I should just go home before they deport me. No, James said. We're not giving up. He called the immigration lawyer, who was encouraging. The U visa application is strong. Carl reporting her actually helps the case, shows he's retaliating, but she needs to be prepared for a fight. James also called his own lawyer about the lawsuit. It's frivolous, the lawyer said, but defending it will cost money and time. Carl's just trying to harass her. That night, James found Elena packing her suitcase. What are you doing? He asked. Leaving, Elena said quietly. I am causing you too much trouble. Better if I go back to Romania before everything gets worse, what? Is that what you want? James asked. To go back? Elena stopped packing and sat on the bed. No, but I am tired, James. Tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of being burden. You're not a burden, James said, sitting beside her, and I don't want you to go. Why? Elena looked at him, and there was something desperate in her eyes. Why do you want me to stay? James opened his mouth and closed it again. Because I love you, his heart screamed. Because this cabin feels empty without you. Because I've been more alive in the past 2 months than I have in 8 years. But he couldn't say it. Not when she was vulnerable, not when she might just be confusing gratitude with something else. Because you deserve to be happy, he said instead. And running away won't make you happy. Elena looked disappointed, but she nodded. Okay, I will stay and fight. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. James's daughter Katie called, her voice cold on the phone. "Dad, what's going on?" Betty Morrison from town called Mom, saying you're living with some young foreign woman, that you're in some kind of legal trouble. James closed his eyes. Small-town gossip had finally reached his daughter. "It's complicated, Katie. So it's true?" James explained the situation as best he could. About Elena showing up that morning, about Carl, about the lawsuits and the immigration issues. "I'm just helping someone who needed help," he said. There was a long pause. "Dad, are you being taken advantage of? I mean, you don't really know this woman." "It's not like that," James said. "Then what is it like?" Katie asked. "Because from here it sounds like you've gotten yourself involved in something messy with a stranger who showed up out of nowhere." "She's not a stranger anymore," James said quietly. Another pause. "Dad, I'm coming up there." "Katie, you don't need to. I'm coming this weekend. We need to talk." She hung up before James could argue. He stood holding the phone, dreading the confrontation to come. When he told Elena about Katie's visit, she went pale. "She thinks I am using you." "She doesn't know you," James said. "Once she meets you, she'll understand." But Elena shook her head. "No, she is protecting her father. I understand this. If some strange woman appeared in my father's life, I would be suspicious too." Friday evening, Katie arrived. She was 25, with James's dark hair and her mother's sharp eyes. She took one look at Elena and her expression went cold. "So you're Elena," Katie said. "Yes. It is nice to meet you." Elena held out her hand. Katie shook it briefly. "I'd like to talk to my father alone." Elena excused herself to the bedroom. James watched her go, then turned to face his daughter. "Katie, I know how this looks. Do you, Dad?" Katie interrupted. "Because it looks like a young woman showed up here claiming to need help. And now you're paying for lawyers and getting sued and defending her to everyone. How long have you known her?" 2 months? "Almost 3, James said. 3 months. "Dad, that's nothing." "You don't know her. You don't know what she really wants." "I know she's brave and kind and doing her best in an impossible situation," James said. "I know she came here looking for a better life and got trapped in a nightmare. I know she could have stayed with Carl, miserable but legal. But she had the courage to walk away. Or maybe she's a really good actress who saw a lonely man living alone and saw an opportunity," Katie said. James felt anger flash through him. "Is that really what you think of me? That I'm some pathetic old fool who can't tell when he's being used?" "I think you're lonely," Katie said, her voice softening slightly. "I think you've been alone up here for years. And suddenly there's a young, pretty woman who needs rescuing, and it's easy to confuse gratitude with something else." "You think I don't know the difference?" James asked. "I think you're not thinking clearly," Katie said. "Dad, I'm worried about you. This whole situation is messy and complicated, and you're right in the middle of it. What happens when her visa issues are resolved? What happens when she doesn't need you anymore?" James was quiet for a long moment. It was the question he'd been asking himself for weeks. "I guess we'll find out," Katie sighed. "I'm staying the weekend. I want to see what's really going on here." Dinner that night was tense. Elena had made a beautiful meal, but the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Katie watched Elena like a hawk, clearly looking for signs of manipulation. "So, Elena," Katie said, "what are your plans? Once your visa situation is sorted out?" Elena glanced at James, then back at Katie. "I do not know yet. Find job, maybe. I was teacher in Romania. I would like to teach again." "Here in the mountains?" Katie asked skeptically. "There's not much call for teachers up here. Maybe in town," Elena said quietly. "Or maybe somewhere else." "So you might leave," Katie said, and James felt his heart sink. "I might," Elena agreed. "I have not decided." After dinner, Katie cornered James in the kitchen while Elena was in the bathroom. "Dad, she has no plan. She has no idea what she's doing or where she's going. You're not helping her by letting her stay here indefinitely. You're just delaying the inevitable. What do you want me to do?" James asked, frustrated. "Kick her out while she's dealing with legal issues and has nowhere to go?" "I want you to protect yourself," Katie said, "before you get hurt." That night James lay awake, Katie's words echoing in his head. What if she was right? What if Elena left as soon as she could, grateful but gone? What if he was setting himself up for heartbreak? The next morning, James overheard Katie and Elena talking in the kitchen. He was about to announce himself when Katie's words stopped him. I don't know what your game is, Katie was saying, but my father is a good man who's been hurt enough. If you're using him, I love him, Elena said, and James's heart stopped. What? I love your father, Elena repeated, stronger this time. I know you think I am using him, that I am some gold digger, but there is no gold here. Just kind man who saved my life when he did not have to. Just person who makes me feel safe and seen and valued. I did not plan this. I did not want to fall in love. But I did, and yes, maybe I will have to leave someday. Maybe I will have to go back to Romania or move to city for job. And it will break my heart, but I will not apologize for loving him. There was a long silence. James held his breath, waiting for Katie's response. If you hurt him, Katie said finally, her voice not quite as cold. If you break his heart, I will never forgive you. If I hurt him, Elena said, I will never forgive myself. James quietly backed away, his mind reeling. She loved him. Elena loved him. And he'd been pushing her away, convinced he was protecting her, when maybe he'd just been protecting himself. Later that afternoon, Katie found James in his workshop. I talked to her, Katie said without preamble. Really talked to her. I heard, James admitted. Katie looked surprised, then thoughtful. So you know. Yeah, and? Katie asked. What are you going to do about it? I don't know, James said. It's complicated. Dad, Katie said, sitting on his workbench. I came here angry, ready to protect you from some woman I thought was taking advantage. But I've watched you two together. I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching. I've seen how she lights up when you walk into the room. And I realized something. What? James asked. You're happy, Katie said simply. For the first time since before the divorce, maybe even before that, you're actually happy. And that scares you. James couldn't deny it. What if she leaves? Then she leaves, Katie said. But at least you'll have had this. At least you'll have had something real. Isn't that better than hiding up here forever, safe but lonely? James thought about that. About the past 8 years, alone in his cabin. About the past 3 months with Elena. Alive and scared and more himself than he'd been in years. When did you get so smart? He asked. Katie smiled. I learned from a pretty good dad, even if it took me a while to remember that. That night was Katie's last night before heading back to Denver. At dinner, the atmosphere was completely different. Katie asked Elena about Romania, about her teaching, about her dreams. Elena relaxed and opened up, her smile genuine and bright. After dinner, Katie hugged her father at the door. Don't waste this, Dad, she whispered. Don't let fear rob you of something good. After Katie left, James and Elena cleaned up the dishes in silence. Finally, James couldn't take it anymore. Elena, he said, we need to talk. Elena's face went pale. If you want me to leave, I understand. Katie is right, I am complicating your life. I heard you, James interrupted. This morning in the kitchen. I heard what you told Katie. Elena froze. Oh, did you mean it? James asked. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, I know I should not feel this way. I know it is too soon, too complicated, but I cannot help it. I love you, James. James crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. I love you too, he said against her hair. I've been trying not to, trying to do the right thing, but Katie made me realize I was just being a coward. Elena pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. You love me? So much it terrifies me, James admitted. Elena laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. Good. I am terrified too. James kissed her then, finally letting himself feel everything he'd been pushing down. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. What do we do now? Elena asked. Now we fight, James said. Together. We fight Carl. We fight the immigration system. We fight whatever comes, but we do it together. Elena nodded, and for the first time since she'd arrived at his cabin that cold November morning, she looked truly hopeful, not just for survival, but for something more, for a future, for love, for home. The legal battles dragged through winter like a slow-moving storm. Carl's lawsuit was dismissed in February after the judge called it frivolous and ordered Carl to pay Elena's legal fees. Carl refused to pay and instead filed an appeal, but his lawyer quietly told James's lawyer that Carl didn't have a case. He was just being spiteful. The immigration hearing was harder. Elena had to testify about everything Carl had done, every cruel word, every threat. She had to show the bruises on her arm where he'd grabbed her, photographs she'd been smart enough to take before running. James sat in the back of the courtroom watching her be brave, wanting to hold her but knowing she had to do this herself. The immigration judge was a stern woman in her 60s who listened without expression. When Elena finished, the judge looked at Carl, who'd shown up in a wrinkled suit smelling of alcohol. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, "do you dispute any of these claims?" Carl muttered something about Elena being dramatic, about how he'd paid good money for her and she'd run off first chance she got. The judge's expression hardened. "Let me be clear. Human beings are not property. Ms. Popescu entered this country legally, and she has every right to seek protection from abuse. Furthermore, your own testimony confirms her account. This visa will be approved. Case closed." Elena nearly collapsed with relief. James met her outside the courtroom and held her while she cried, but this time they were tears of joy. "It is over," she kept saying. "It is really over." "Not quite," James said gently. "You've got the U visa, which is great, but you still need to figure out what you want to do next." Elena pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're free now," James said, even though the words hurt. "You can go anywhere, do anything. You don't have to stay in the mountains if you don't want to." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "And if I want to stay?" "Then stay," James said simply. "But make sure it's because it's what you want, not because you feel obligated." Over the next few weeks, Elena thought hard about her future. She looked into teaching jobs in Denver and Boulder, in the smaller towns around the mountains. She researched what she'd need to do to get her teaching license recognized in America. She called her parents and talked for hours about her options. James gave her space even though every day he wondered if she'd announced she was leaving. He'd meant what he said, that she should choose her own path. But that didn't mean it wouldn't destroy him if she chose to leave. Then one evening in March, Elena came into his workshop while he was putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair. "That is beautiful," she said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "Who is it for?" "Haven't decided yet," James said. "Just felt like making it," Elena smiled. "You should sell your furniture, you know. People would pay good money for this quality." "Maybe," James said. "Never really thought about it." "I have been thinking," Elena said, settling onto his workbench. "About a lot of things." James's heart sank. Here it comes, he thought. She's leaving. "I found teaching job," Elena continued. "In Boulder. Good school, good pay. They were impressed by my experience." "That's great," James said, trying to sound happy. "They offered me position starting in August," Elena said. "Full-time, teaching English and Romanian language classes." "That's really great," James repeated, his voice hollow. "I turned it down," Elena said quietly. James looked up sharply. "What? Why?" "Because I also found something else," Elena said. "Community center 2 towns over. They are looking for adult education coordinator, someone to organize classes, find teachers, work with community. It is part-time, but they loved my ideas, and I could still tutor students on side." "Elena," James said carefully, "that's a lot less money than the Boulder job." "You don't have to." "I know I do not have to," Elena interrupted, "but I want to. The Boulder job is good job, yes, but it is not what I want. I want to stay here. I want to build something in this community. I want to wake up to mountains every morning. I want to have coffee with you on the porch and help you with wood stacking and cook dinners in that kitchen. I want home, James, and home is here." James set down his tools, his hands shaking slightly. "You're sure? This is really what you want?" Elena jumped down from the workbench and came to stand in front of him. "I am more sure than I have ever been about anything. I did not come to America looking for you, but I found you anyway, and I am not foolish enough to walk away from that." James pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I was terrified you were going to leave." "I was terrified you would want me to," Elena admitted. "That you were being kind but really wanted your peaceful life back." "My life before you showed up wasn't peaceful," James said. "It was empty. You filled all the empty spaces." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the workshop, surrounded by sawdust and half-finished projects, and it felt like coming home. The community center hired Elena in April. She threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, organizing ESL classes, computer literacy programs, job skills workshops. The community, which had been suspicious at first, slowly warmed to her. She had a way,